Chapter 1. The Woman No One Would Name. Market day in Redemption Wells came in on a haze of dust and the smell of horse and coffee, and Nora Redcloud walked into it the way she always did, chin level, spine straight, her worn moccasins soft on the warped planks of the boardwalk. She carried her herbs wrapped in a square of trade cloth, tied at the corners, cradled against her hip the way another woman might carry a child. She had picked them at first light along the wash where the willow grew, and she had bruised no leaf, spoiled no root. They were good. They were the best a person could buy in this whole scorched corner of the territory, and every soul on that street knew it, and not one of them would say it aloud. They saw her coming. That was the thing she had learned young, that people who despised you always saw you first, before they saw anything they loved. A woman near the water trough took her daughter by the shoulders and turned her gently, as though from a coming wagon. Two men outside the barber shop went quiet, then went on talking lower. A boy of maybe 10 stared with open, uneducated curiosity until his mother's hand found the back of his collar. Nora did not slow. She did not look at any of them straight on, but she did not drop her eyes either. She had a rule about that, made long ago in a harder year, and she had never once broken it. She would not look at the ground for them. The ground was hers to look at when she chose, not when they wished it. At her throat lay the turquoise, a single stone the color of deep water, strung on sinew that had gone dark and smooth with the years. Her mother's mother had worn it, and her mother after, and now it lay against Nora's collarbone where anyone could see it and no one could take it. She wore it like other women wore a wedding band or a crucifix or a pistol. It said, "I come from somewhere. Whatever you decide about me, I come from somewhere, and it is older than this town and your father's both." She stopped at the mercantile counter and set her bundle down and untied it, and the good green smell of it rose into the morning. "Sage," she said, "and the willow bark for fever, and the yarrow, that's for a wound that won't close, good this season. I can tell you the use of each." The clerk, a soft young man named Prout with a habit of not meeting anyone's eyes, looked past her shoulder as if hoping someone would come and settle the matter for him. Martha Doyle settled it. She came up the boardwalk in her Sunday stiff bombazine, even on a Tuesday, boarding house keys jingling at her belt like a jailer's, and she planted herself square and took in the scene with the satisfaction of a woman who had been waiting all week for exactly this. "We don't trade with the half-breed," Martha said. Not to Nora. To the clerk, to the street, to the whole listening town, never to Nora herself, for to speak to her directly would have granted her a standing Martha did not intend to grant. "Take your weeds somewhere they don't know what you are, girl. Everybody here knows." The word landed the way it always landed. Not a knife, Nora was past knives. More like the cold that comes up off a river at dusk, familiar, expected, and no easier for being either. She felt it move through her, and she let it move through and pass, the way her Uncle Bright River had taught her to let hard water pass over a stone. She kept her voice even. "The bark is a fair price. 2 bits the bundle, and it'll break a fever your doctor charges $1 to watch." "There," said Martha, delighted, turning to the gathered few. "Sassing me, that's the manners you get from that blood." Nora said nothing more. She had learned that, too, that there was a point past which words only fed them, and she would not be the one to lay the table. It was Prout who did the cruelest thing, and he did it, she thought, precisely because he was weak, and not because he was cruel. The weak ones always needed to prove which side of the line they stood on. His hand came out clumsy, quick, meant to look like an accident to anyone who wanted it to look like one, and swept the opened bundle off the counter's edge. The cloth turned in the air, and her herbs went down into the churned mud and dust of the street. Sage and willow and yarrow scattered across a morning's worth of hoofprints. Somebody laughed, just one, it didn't matter who. Nora looked at the mess a moment, then she knelt. She knelt slowly, and she gathered slowly, and she did it with her back straight, even bent over, picking each sprig from the dirt one at a time, shaking the grit from it, laying it back in the cloth. She did not hurry, because to hurry would have told them they had struck something. She did not weep, because she had decided a great many years ago in a lean-to at the edge of this same town that she would use her tears on things that deserved them, and this town did not and never would. Her hands were steady. That was the victory available to her that morning, the only one, and she took it. Her hands did not shake, and she gathered every leaf. Across the street, a man on a rangy bay horse had drawn up and gone still. Nora felt the attention before she placed it, a different weight than the others, and she had a life's practice at telling the kinds of attention apart. She glanced up from her kneeling and found him. He was big through the shoulders and plain in the face, dust-colored from the trail, a rancher by the look of the working leather on him and the way he sat the horse like he'd been born up there and never got down. She knew the type by sight, if not the man himself. Hartley, someone had said once, the one who came up from nothing and built the spread out past the creek. He was not looking at her the way the street looked at her. There was no curl to his mouth, no calculation, no hunger, no sport. He was only looking, steady and level, the way a man looks at weather coming in, or at another man he is taking the measure of. Looking at her as though she were a person whose morning had just been ruined, and that was a thing worth noticing. He said nothing. He didn't tip his hat or ride over or make a speech, and later she would understand that this was the truest thing about him, that he did not perform kindness, because kindness performed is only pride wearing a good coat. He just held her in that plain gaze one moment longer, and then he swung down off the bay and looped the rein and went about his business at the far counter, buying nails and coffee and salt. She finished gathering. She tied the corners of the cloth. She stood, and the dust came off her knees, and she turned to go, because there was no trade to be had here today, and there rarely was, and she would eat what she had put by or she would not eat, and either way she would not do it in front of Martha Doyle. She lived, when she lived anywhere, in a lean-to at the ragged eastern edge of the town where the good lots gave out and the mesquite came in. It was hers only in that no one else had wanted it. Come a bad winter, and they had all felt this one shaping mean in the early cold and the thin creek, it would keep out neither wind nor want. She belonged to no one. There was no name she could give that would open a door, no people who would ride in and stand at her shoulder. Her white father lay under a wooden marker gone gray, dead of the lung fever when she was 9, and her mother's people were 3 days' ride into the hills and could not keep her when the soldiers and the years had done their scattering work, and loved her still in the way you love a thing you could not hold. Half of everything, whole of nothing. One bad winter from the end of it. She had gone perhaps a dozen steps when the rancher's voice reached her, low and unhurried, close behind. "That willow bark and the yarrow." He had come up quiet for a big man. "I'll take the lot of it." Nora turned and looked at him and gave nothing away, because giving nothing away was the last thing she owned outright. "It's been in the street," she said flatly. "You saw." "I saw the street was dirty," Hartley said. "Herbs shake clean. I've a mare with a wound that won't knit in a bunkhouse full of men who catch fever every fall like clockwork." He wasn't smiling, wasn't soft about it. He held out coin, and it was fair coin, more than fair, the honest price and not a charity penny more nor less, which was its own kind of respect, and she knew it the instant she saw it. "Name your price and I'll meet it." She named it. He met it exactly and pressed the coins into her palm without letting his fingers linger, and took the bundle, and touched his hat brim once, to her this time, not past her, and went to his horse. She stood holding the money and did not trust it. Trust was a thing that had cost her before. A man who was kind on a public street was a man who wanted something, or a man building himself a story to tell, and she had been the cheap material of too many other people's stories to walk gladly into one more. But the coins were warm from his hand and real in hers, and she closed her fist on them and walked on toward the eastern edge of town. She had nearly cleared the last of the good buildings when the jeering started. Silas Boone's men lounged on the saloon porch in the shade, boots up on the rail, and they had watched the whole of it and found it fine entertainment. One of them made a sound at her, low, that a man makes at a dog. Another called out something about squaws and the price of them, and laughed, and the laugh spread down the porch easy as spilled water. Nora did not turn her head. She walked on, straight-backed, the turquoise at her throat and the fair coin in her fist. But she marked the tone of it, the new boldness, the way the ugliness had crept up out of muttering and into open daylight with no one to check it. The town's patience with her was a rope, and she had lived on that rope her whole life, and this morning she had felt it go thin and dry and ready to fray. Somewhere behind her, she did not know it yet, a plain-faced rancher was riding home with her herbs in his saddlebag, and a thought forming that would change the length of that rope entirely. She only knew the walk home, and the wind coming early off the hills, and that she belonged, as ever, nowhere at all. Chapter 2, A Man Who Hires on Worth. The wind that came down off the Mogollon Rim carried the smell of trouble before old Tom could put it into words. He stood in the barn's open mouth with his hat crushed in both hands, watching Caleb Hartley kneel in the straw beside the roan mare, and he knew the look on his own weathered face was the look of a man who had already lost the fight. "She won't take water," Tom said. "Won't take grass. Been down since the noon bell, and every hour she's worse. It's the twisted gut, Caleb. I've seen it kill better mares than her, and I've never once seen a man turn it." Caleb ran his palm along the mare's heaving flank. Bess was the best breeding stock he owned, the animal he'd staked half his herd's future on, and she was dying under his hand while he had nothing to give her but the warmth of his own touch. He was not a man given to cursing, but he came near it then. "The doctor for animals is 3 days' ride in Prescott," Caleb said. "She's got hours, not days." "There's another," Tom said it slow, the way a man tests thin ice. "Might be you won't like the hearing of it, the herb woman, Red Cloud's girl." Caleb looked up. "I've seen her do things," Tom went on. "Out at the freight yard, I watched that woman put her hands on a mule nobody could get within a rod of, whispering to it in that tongue of hers, and inside an hour it was eating from her palm. Whatever's in her, Caleb, it's real. The rest of the town spits at her, because it's easier than being beholden." Caleb was already reaching for his hat. "You know what folks'll say," Tom warned. "Folks say a great deal," Caleb answered, "and pay me to hear none of it." He swung up onto his gray without another word and put the horse toward town. Nora Red Cloud lived where the town let its edges fray, in a lean-to of gray planking and stretched hide backed against the wash, where the mesquite grew thick and no respectable soul had reason to walk. She was grinding dried yarrow between 2 stones when she heard the horse, and she was on her feet with the paring knife hidden in the fold of her skirt before the rider cleared the brush. A woman who belonged nowhere learned early that a man arriving at dusk arrived for one of 2 reasons, and neither of them was kindness. Then she saw who it was, the rancher from the boardwalk, the one who had pressed fair coin into her hand that morning and made no speech of it. "Mr. Hartley," she did not soften. Her chin came up and the turquoise at her throat caught the last of the light. "The store's back the way you came. I've nothing here you'd want." "I've got a mare with a twisted gut," Caleb said. He stayed on his horse, which she noted, and kept his hands where she could see them, which she noted more. "My foreman says you can gentle sick animals when no one else can. I've come to hire you. A day's wage, same as I'd pay any hand, and more if she lives." The word hire sat strange in the air between them. Nora had been called many things across the mercantile counter, and none of them had been an offer of work at an honest wage. She turned it over, looking for the hook inside the bait. "And when the mare dies anyway," she said, "and you need a reason it wasn't your bad luck, you'll have the half-breed to hang it on. I've seen how that road runs, Mr. Hartley, Callahan's gelding. They said I hexed it. I'll not put my neck under that again for your coin." "Callahan's a fool who let a good horse die to spite his own pride," Caleb said. "I don't aim to be one." He leaned down, and there was nothing soft in his face, only a plain and level certainty that unsettled her more than charm would have. "I'm not asking you to work miracles. I'm asking you to try. If she dies, and no man on my land will say a word against you, or I'll know why. That's my word. It's worth something where I come from." Pride, Nora had learned, was a fine thing to wear but a poor thing to eat. There was a cold coming that winter, and her herb tin was near empty, and the store would take no more of her coin than it had to. She looked at the man a long moment, hunting for the cruelty she was sure was folded somewhere inside the offer. She did not find it. That frightened her worst of all. "I'll need my satchel," she said at last. "And I keep what's mine. My hands, my ways, no one standing over me telling me it's wrong because it isn't Christian." "Agreed," Caleb said. She worked over the mare from full dark until the sky went gray in the east. Old Tom hung a lantern and then hung back, arms crossed, meaning to disapprove and finding he could not. He watched the herb woman kneel in the straw and lay both hands flat on the mare's belly, feeling for the knot of it the way a person reads a knot in a rope by touch alone. He watched her brew a bitter tea of things he had no names for and coax it down the animal's throat a swallow at a time, murmuring low in the old tongue, a sound like water going over smooth stones. He watched her get the mare up when everyone knew a colicked horse must not be let to lie, walking her in slow circles through the freezing dark, hour on hour, when her own arms must have been burning. Twice the mare tried to go down. Twice Nora hauled her up by will and voice alone. Near dawn, the animal shuddered along its whole length, and something loosed inside it, and Bess dropped her head and blew out a great breath, and at long last reached for the hay net Tom had given up hanging in hope. The old foreman took off his hat. He did not put it back on. "I've rode 30 years, he said, "and I never saw the like. Miss Red Cloud, I'll say it plain, I came out here ready to think the worst of you same as everybody. I was wrong, and I don't mind who hears me own it." Nora, gray to the elbows with sweat and straw, said nothing for a moment. In all her years, no white man had ever told her she'd made him ashamed of his own smallness. She did not know where to put the feeling, so she put it away, careful, the way she'd learned to put away everything that might be taken back. "She'll need watching 2 days," was all she said. "Bran mash, no grass, I'll show your man how." Caleb paid her at the kitchen table, in daylight, in front of Tom and the ranch cook and the 2 hands who'd wandered in for breakfast. He counted the coins into her palm, a full day's wage, and the extra he'd promised, and then he did the thing that undid her more than the money. He set a plate in front of her and told her to eat. Nora looked at the food and at the men around the table who ate with her, or beside her, without their faces curdling, and for one dangerous moment she could not trust her own voice. She had spent her life being handed things through half-open doors, being served last or not at all, being made to feel her presence at any table was a favor grudgingly given. And here a man had simply set a chair and expected her to fill it. "You came up hard," she said, to have something to say. "A man doesn't get like this from ease." "Orphaned at 9, Caleb said, salting his eggs as though it were an ordinary thing to tell. "Raised on other men's charity, which is to say raised on being reminded I was a burden, drove cattle at 12. Slept in more barns than beds till I was grown." He looked at her then, direct. "I learned a thing out there worth more than the land I bought. A man's blood tells you nothing about his worth, nothing at all. The kindest soul I ever knew was a Mexican vaquero the whole country would have called less than dirt, and the meanest was a church-going white man with a pew and a Bible. After that, I stopped asking what a person was. I only ask what they'll do." Nora set down her fork. She had been waiting all night and all morning for the cruelty to surface, the joke, the leer, the price named at last. She understood now, slowly, that there was no price coming. The understanding sat in her chest like a swallowed coal, painful and warm. "You'll pay for this," she said quietly, "having me here." The town's not sitting at my table," Caleb said. "You are." The trouble came before noon, as trouble does. A hand named Deakins, a sour, thin-necked man who'd never much liked anything, threw down his gloves in the yard where all could hear. "I signed to punch cattle," he announced. "Not to bunk next to a squaw who talks witchery to horses. It's her or me, Hartley. I'll not eat where she eats." The whole yard went still. Old Tom's jaw set. Nora, standing in the barn's shadow, felt the old, familiar cold slide down through her. This was the part she knew by heart. This was where the door closed. She had already begun, without deciding to reckon how long it would take to gather her satchel and go. Caleb did not so much as raise his voice. "Then it's you, Deakins," he said. "Draw your wages from Tom. You're done here by supper." Deakins gaped. "You'd let a good hand walk over that." "I'd let 10 of you walk," Caleb said. "That woman saved me a mare worth more than your year's pay in a single night, and she did it while you slept. Go on, daylight's wasting." Deakins went, cursing, kicking dust, but he went. And the yard breathed again, and the work took up where it had left off, and it was as though a stone that had blocked a stream had simply been rolled aside. Nora stood in the barn doorway a long time after, her hand pressed to the turquoise at her throat, not trusting herself to move. No one had ever chosen her, not her mother's people who could not keep her, not her father's who would not. All her life she had been the thing set down when a hard choice came, never once the thing held onto. And a plain-spoken rancher had just stood in his own yard, and without a speech, without so much as a raised hand, chosen her over a man of his own kind and blood. That night she lay awake in the bunk shed they had swept and given over to her, a real roof over her, the smell of clean straw and horse and wood smoke around her, the sounds of the ranch settling into the dark. Somewhere a coyote called and another answered, and she thought how each of them, at least, had its own to call to. She turned the day over in the dark, careful as a woman handling something that might break, and she let herself think the one thought she had spent her whole life forbidding, because to think it and lose it was the surest way to be broken. Maybe she let herself think, just maybe. Maybe this was a place a person like her could stay. She held the thought a moment, terrified of it, and then she closed her hand around the turquoise at her throat, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, slept without one ear open for the sound of someone coming to drive her out. Chapter 3, The Town Takes Notice. The gossip reached Redemption Wells before the dust of Nora's first week had settled on the Hartley Road. It came the way such things always came, not on horseback or wire, but on the breath of women leaning over fence rails. and by the third morning Martha Doyle had shaped it into something with teeth. "Taken up with the half-breed," she said on the boarding house steps, loud enough for the street to hear, wringing a dish towel as though it were somebody's neck. "A man with 200 head and good bottomland, keeping that Red Cloud woman under his roof. My mother, rest her, would not have believed it of a white man." The church steps carried it further come Sunday. The words moved from mouth to ear, softened and sharpened, until by Monday it was understood in every parlor that Caleb Hartley had lost either his judgment or his morals, and possibly both. No one had ridden out to the ranch to see. No one needed to. The story was better than the truth and cost less to keep. Nora heard it the way she heard most things, sideways and second-hand, from old Tom, who came in from the mercantile run with a face like a storm front, and set the flour sack down harder than the flour required. "Folks are talking," he said. Folks are always talking. She did not look up from the mare's foreleg, where she was working a poultice of yarrow into the swelling above the fetlock. The mare, the same one she had pulled back from a twisted gut her first night, stood quiet under her hands now, one ear tipped toward her voice. "It is what they do instead of thinking." Tom grunted. He was old enough that most things had stopped surprising him, but a certain amount of loyalty had lately taken root in him where his surprise used to live, and it made him restless. "They're saying things about you that ain't true, and things about him that ain't their business. And you rode all this way to tell me so I could feel it twice." That drew something close to a laugh out of him, dry as a creek bed in August. He crouched beside her, watching her hands. "You're good with her," he admitted, nodding at the mare. "I've been 40 years with horses. I couldn't have done what you did that night. My mother's people learned it before your people came." She said it plainly, no barb in it, and pressed the last of the poultice home. "There is no shame in that. There is no shame in any of it." Tom looked at her a moment longer than was comfortable, then pushed himself upright with a hand on his knee. "No," he said, "I don't reckon there is." Silas Boone came on Thursday, which was the trouble with men like Boone. They never came like weather, honest, and announced. They came like a smiling neighbor with a proposition. He rode a blood bay worth more than the whole of Nora's life to date, and he wore a coat too fine for cattle work, and he touched his hat brim to Caleb on the porch with the ease of a man who had never once been refused anything he truly wanted. Nora watched from the corral, her hands going still on the lead rope, and something old and animal in her went quiet and watchful. "Hartley," Boone said, "I'll come to it plain. That north quarter of yours, the piece along the creek, I'll give you good money for it, better than good. You could clear your paper and have cash left to winter easy." Caleb leaned against the porch post, unhurried. "Land's not for sale." "Everything's for sale, given the number." Boone smiled. He had a wide, even smile, the kind that had closed a great many deals and comforted a great many men just before it emptied their pockets. "But I'll tell you, Caleb, there's a thing troubling me, and I'd not be a good neighbor if I let it lie." He let his gaze drift, unhurried, to the corral, to Nora, and back. "A man's reputation is his water rights in this country, dries up and it don't come back. You've got that woman living on your place, and folks are saying, well, you know what they're saying." "I know what they're saying." "Send her on her way." Boone spread his hands, reasonable, generous, a man offering to save you from yourself. "Give her $1 and a day's ride and be done. Folks forget, and a fellow inclined to be neighborly might find the price on that north quarter climbs considerable for a man of good standing." His smile widened. "Bad standing's expensive, is all I'm saying." The porch was quiet. Somewhere a jay scolded from the cottonwoods. Nora felt her own pulse in her throat and hated that she felt it, hated that after all these years a rich man's smile could still make her wait for the blow. Caleb pushed off the post. He was not a large man, not the way Boone was large, but he had a stillness that filled the space he stood in. "My ranch," Caleb said, "my hire, and my word which I gave her when I took her on." He said it the way another man might state the day of the week. "You want the north quarter, the answer's no. You want me to run off a woman who's twice the hand of anyone you've got, the answer's the same, only I'll say it slower so you take my meaning." Something flickered behind Boone's eyes, there and gone. Then the smile came back, and that was the part that turned Nora's stomach, for Boone did not redden, did not curse, did not draw himself up. He gathered his reins and settled the fine coat on his shoulders and looked almost pleased. "Well," he said, "I admire a man who knows his own mind, Caleb. I truly do." He touched his hat brim again to Caleb, and then, deliberate as a card laid face up, to Nora across the yard. "Ma'am." He rode off at a walk in no hurry at all, and Nora watched him go and knew, the way she knew coming weather, that a man who left smiling had not left at all. The weather she knew for certain came 4 days later. She read it in the morning, in the way the horses crowded the low end of the corral, in a green-black bruise building over the western peaks, in the smell of the wind, which had gone flat and metallic. She found Caleb at the fence line and told him plain. Rain in the high country hard and fast, and the creek that ran gentle through the north quarter would not run gentle by nightfall. "Move them to the bench above the willows," she said. "Tonight, not tomorrow." Old Tom looked at the sky, which was blue as a robin's egg over Redemption Wells, and said nothing. But Caleb looked at Nora, and then he looked at the horses crowding the corral rail, and then he said, "You heard her. Move them up." They moved better than 100 head to high ground by lantern light, cursing and sweating under a clear and mocking sky, and 2 of the younger hands muttered that the herb woman had them chasing shadows. Then, near midnight, the wall of water came down the north quarter with a sound like a train, tearing out 40 feet of fence and scouring the low pasture to bare rock, the very ground where the herd had grazed that morning. In the gray dawn, the hands stood at the edge of the new-cut gully and did not mutter any more. One of them, the youngest, took off his hat when he passed her, which he had never done, and did not seem to know he had done it. Later, when the worst was past, Caleb took her up to the high pasture to look at the bench where the cattle grazed safe and dry. They rode without much talk. It was easy country up there, the grass silvered with wet and the whole valley laid out below like something spread for their looking. He asked her after a while about her mother's people, not the way the town asked, to place her and dismiss her, but the way a man asks who means to remember the answer. So she told him. She gave him the word for the mountain and the word for the good rain and the word for a horse well-gentled, and he tried them, clumsy, and she did not laugh at him but corrected him the way her mother had corrected her, patient, until he had it. She spoke of the summer camps and the deer-hoof rattles and her mother's hands sorting herbs by feel in the dark. She spoke with her chin up. She had spent a lifetime keeping this folded small inside her where the town could not spit on it, and it was a strange, loosening thing to set it out in the open sun and have a man simply look at it and find it worth having. "They took you from them," Caleb said. "It was not a question." "The agency did, when my father died. They said a half-white child belonged in a white world." She looked out over the valley. "The white world did not agree. And the tribe could not keep what the agency took." Her voice did not break. She had made sure of that long ago. "So I belong to neither. It is an old story. It does not need telling." Caleb was quiet a moment. Then he said, "You ought to know standing by you is going to cost me. Boone, the town, it won't stay words." He said it not as warning but as fact laid between them so she could not later say she had not been told. "I know what it will cost you." She turned in the saddle to face him. "That is why I am telling you to think on it before you go further. Men change their minds when the bill comes due. I would rather you changed it now, while it costs me nothing." Caleb looked at her for a long moment, and the valley wind moved the grass, and when he spoke it was low and even and without any hurry at all. "I know what my word's worth," he said. "It's the one thing I came up in this world owning outright. I don't spend it and take it back." He held her eyes. "I gave it to you. That's the end of the matter, not the middle of it." Nora did not answer. She could not just then. Something had come loose in her chest that she did not have a word for in either of her tongues, and she turned her face back to the valley so he would not see it, and let the wind have it instead. In town that same afternoon, Martha Doyle stood in the doorway of the parsonage with 3 other women at her back, and told Reverend Price that a man of God who stayed silent on such a scandal was no man of God at all. The Reverend, who wanted only to be decent, and was learning how hard a thing that was to want in Redemption Wells, said he would pray on it. "Pray at the pulpit," Martha said. "Sunday, where the Lord and the whole town can hear you." And she left him standing in his own doorway, with the weight of it settling on him like the first cold of winter. Chapter 4, Between Two Worlds. The trail to the Apache camp climbed out of the low country where Caleb's cattle grazed, and into the broken hills that no white man's fence had ever crossed. Nora rode it alone, the way she had ridden it since girlhood, and every mile of it was familiar and strange at once. Familiar the way a scar is familiar, a thing that belonged to her body but had been made by a wound. She had told old Tom she would be gone a day. He had only nodded, tightening the cinch on her borrowed saddle with his gnarled hands, and said, "Go careful, girl, come back." No suspicion in it. No question of whether she would return to steal or to signal or to bring down some Apache thunder on the ranch. Just come back. She carried those 2 words up the trail like a warm coal in her palm. The camp lay in a fold of the hills, where a spring still ran in August. She smelled wood smoke and horses before she saw the wickiups, brush and hide domes crouched low against the earth. Children saw her first. They stopped their game and watched her come, dark eyes wide, and one small boy ran to fetch someone, his bare feet kicking up dust. She swung down from the saddle. A woman near the cook fire glanced up, took in Nora's boots, white shoes, hard-soled, town-made, and looked away again, not cruelly, but the way you look away from a thing that does not fit the picture your eyes expected. Nora felt the old flush climb her neck. Here, too, even here. "Nahi," the voice came from the largest wickiup, low and cracked with age. Bright River stepped into the light. He was thinner than she remembered, his hair gone the color of ash and river stone, but his back was straight and his eyes had not dimmed. He was her mother's brother, the last of that blood who still spoke her name. He looked at her for a long moment, and something in his weathered face softened. "You have come," he said in the old tongue. She answered in the same tongue and heard herself stumble on it, the words coming slow, the shapes of them worn wrong in her mouth from too many years of English. "I have come, uncle." He caught the fumble. Of course he caught it. But he only lifted the door hide and gestured her in, and she ducked into the cool dark of his home. They sat. A woman brought them roasted mescal and water, and Bright River waited, as the old ones always waited, until the food had been honored before he spoke of anything that mattered. Nora made herself be still. In town, stillness was a weapon she used against the stairs. Here it was only manners, and she had half forgotten how. "You are well?" he asked at last. "You are eating." "I have work now," she said. "A rancher, Hartley, he pays me a man's wage to heal his horses." She hesitated. "He pays me true, uncle. He seats me at his own table." Bright River's eyes moved over her, the fuller cheeks, the mended shirt, the turquoise still at her throat where her mother had knotted it years ago. "You look less like the winter," he allowed. Then more quietly, "And this Whitewater man. What does he want from you that he pays true?" "My work, only my work." But even as she said it, she thought of Caleb's eyes tracking her across the mercantile street, the way he had pressed fair coin into her hand without a speech, and she was not certain the words were the whole of the truth. The old man saw that too. He had always seen too much. He set down his cup and folded his hands, and when he spoke it was with the terrible gentleness of a man who loves you enough to cut. "Nahi, daughter of my sister, I will tell you a hard thing because no one else will love you enough to say it." He drew a breath. "You cannot fully be of us, you know this. Your mother went to a white man not by force, by her own heart, and the people remember it. When the soldiers came and scattered us, you were taken to the town and raised in their houses and their speech. You wear their shoes, you pray when you pray at all, half in their words. The girls whisper that you walk like a settler. The old women say your hands have forgotten the baskets." He shook his head slowly. "It is not hate, child. It is only that a stream that has run into a river cannot easily be called back up the mountain. We would not turn you away, but we cannot make you whole here. That door has narrowed to a crack, and it narrows still." Nora sat very straight. She had known this. She had known it all her life, and still it landed like a hand across the face, because she had ridden up here, some foolish girl part of her, half hoping to be told otherwise. "Then I belong nowhere," she said. Her voice did not shake. She had trained it long ago not to shake. "Not down there, not up here." "You belong to yourself," Bright River said. "That is more than most are given. Do not spend it cheaply." He leaned forward. "And this promise the rancher makes with his eyes, hear me now. A white man's word is written in sand, Nahi. The wind of his own people rises, and the words blow away, and he is still standing there with clean hands, wondering where they went. I have seen it. Your mother saw it at the end. Do not build your house on a white man's promise." She said nothing. The coal in her palm, come back, had gone cold. She thought of her mother, who had loved a white man by her own heart and paid for it in both worlds, and had died with the turquoise around her daughter's neck, and a warning never quite finished. "I did not come to build a house on anyone," she said finally, harder than she meant. "I came to see you, to hear your voice, that is all." "I know it." Bright River's hand found hers, dry and warm, and held it. "You are always welcome at my fire for as long as I have one, but a fire is not a home, and I will not lie and call it one." Guard yourself, Nahii. That is a mother's word, and I give it to you in her place. She rode down out of the hills as the light went long and copper across the land, and the whole way she felt the old wound open along its old seam. Rejected by the town for being too Indian, held at arm's length by the people for being too much the town's. Bright River loved her, she did not doubt it, but love was not the same as a place to stand. And Caleb who seated her at his table, Caleb whose regard she had let herself lean toward like a plant toward a window, what was he but another door, and had she not learned 100 times that door's close? She resolved, riding, to expect nothing. It was the only armor that had ever held. She got back to the ranch after dark and found the yard lit and a knot of hands by the barn, talking low. Old Tom broke off and came to take her horse. "Trouble in town today," he said. "Boss went in for nails and Boone's men were on the mercantile porch, said things." Tom's jaw worked. "About you." Nora's stomach tightened, and Caleb didn't draw, didn't shout. A grim satisfaction crept into the old man's voice. "One of 'em called you a name I won't repeat and said the town be cleaner when you was run off. Caleb, he just stepped up close and quiet, and he said, 'The woman works for me. My hire, my ranch, my word. You've got a quarrel with her, you've got a quarrel with me, and I don't quarrel, I settle.' Said it soft, softer than this." Tom shook his head. Them two backed off the porch like the boards had gone hot. "But it's Boone they'll run to. This ain't done, girl." Nora stood in the lamplight, holding the words, "My word." She had ridden all day to be told a white man's word was written in sand. And here was Caleb Hartley, who had not even known she was watching to hear it, spending his standing in town on her name. "Where is he now?" she asked. Tom nodded toward the main house. "Round the north side, been at it since supper, go see." She walked around the house and stopped. Against the north wall, where before there had been only a linta for cordwood, Caleb had framed a room. New-cut lumber pale in the dark, a doorway squared and true, the beginnings of a roof. He was there in his shirt-sleeves, driving a nail by lantern light, sweat dark down his back. When he heard her boots, he straightened and set the hammer down. "You're back," he said, and she heard the plain relief in it unhidden. "Good. What is this?" "A room." He wiped his brow with his forearm. "Off the house, proper walls, a window, a door that bars from the inside. Bunk sheds no place for a person to live year on year." He looked almost embarrassed. "Figured you ought to have a door that's yours, that's all." She could not speak for a moment. He had not said a word of it before she left. He had simply started building in the way he did everything without speech, in wood and nails, in things that would still be standing when speech had blown away. A door that bars from the inside, a door that was hers. Bright River's voice rose in her, written in sand, and here was a man writing in oak. "Why?" she asked, and hated that her voice was not quite steady now. Caleb considered the question honestly, the way he considered everything. "Because you keep looking like you're waiting for me to take it all back," he said. "And I'm not going to. Reckon a body can't hear that in words if they've heard the opposite their whole life. So," he gestured at the frame with the flat of his hand, "figured I'd say it in a wall." She stayed. Long after he'd banked the lantern, she stayed, and in the days that followed something in her began, cautiously, to unbend. In the evenings she started to teach him her mother's things. Which leaf steeped would break a fever, and which would poison a man, how to read a horse's pain in the set of its ears, the old stories, the ones about coyote and the making of the mountains, told in her broken tongue with the English stitched in to fill the gaps. Caleb listened the way he built, patiently, keeping it. He learned to say water and thank you and friend in the old words, said them badly, said them again. At the table the two worlds met, small and real. Cornbread and mescal, a white man's ranch and an Apache woman's medicine, side by side and neither ashamed. One night, telling him of her mother, she reached across the table for the salt at the same moment he reached to move the lamp, and their hands came near, near enough that she felt the heat off his knuckles, near enough that the whole room seemed to hold its breath. Both of them pulled back. Nora folded her hands in her lap. Caleb turned the lamp down a notch it did not need. Neither looked at the other, and neither spoke, because they both knew now what it was that had grown up between them across that table, and what it would cost, his standing, her heart, and maybe, before Boone was through, a great deal more. Outside, the new door hung in its frame, waiting for its bar. Inside, two people who had each spent a lifetime belonging nowhere sat close in the lamplight, afraid, for the first time, of how much they had begun to belong to each other. Chapter 5, The First Whisper. The harvest social was held in the Grange Hall at the edge of Redemption Wells, a long timber building strung with lanterns, and the smell of tallow and cut hay and cider gone half to vinegar. From a mile off, riding in beside Caleb Hartley on the buckboard, Nora could see the yellow light spilling out the open doors, and she could hear the fiddles scraping up something bright and quick. It should have been a warm sight. To her it looked like the mouth of a trap dressed up in ribbon. "You don't have to take me in there," she said. It was the fourth time she had said some version of it since they left the ranch. "You could set me down here and I'd walk back. No one would think less of you." "I'd think less of me?" Caleb said. He kept his eyes on the road and his hands easy on the lines. He had put on a clean shirt and brushed his hat, and he sat the seat like a man going to church rather than to a fight. "And I don't much care what the rest of them think, which you know by now." Nora smoothed her palms down the front of her dress. It was her good dress, the deep blue one, and at her throat lay the turquoise her mother had strung with her own hands. She had told herself she wore it for pride. Sitting there in the dark with her heart knocking, she understood she wore it for armor, the way she always had. "They will not dance with me," she said quietly. "They will not stand near me. You will see it and you will be ashamed, and that will be the end of this." Caleb drew the horses up short of the light and turned to look at her full on. In the lantern glow, his face was plain and steady, the face of a man who had never in her hearing said a thing he did not mean. "Nora," he said her name like it weighed something. "I have been in rooms where I was the poorest man there, wearing another man's cast-off boots, and I learned young that the shame belongs to the ones doing the sneering, not the one being sneered at. You walk in on my arm tonight. Whatever they do, that's their disgrace to carry home, not yours." He clucked to the team. "Now sit up. We're late, and I aim for them to see us come in together." She sat up. They came through the doors into noise and light, and the noise died the way a fire dies when a door is thrown open on a winter wind, all at once, and with a kind of gasp. The fiddle held one wavering note and then went silent. 50 faces turned toward them, and 50 faces changed, mouths tightening, eyes going flat and hard. Nora felt the old heat crawl up her neck and made herself stand still under it, the way she had made herself gather her spilled herbs from the dust without weeping weeks ago, while this same town watched. Martha Doyle rose from the long table where the women had laid out their pies. She rose slowly with great dignity, the way a judge rises to pronounce a sentence, and she gathered her shawl about her shoulders. "Well," Martha said to the whole hall and to no one, "I did hear Mr. Hartley had lost his sense. I did not credit it until now." "Evening, Mrs. Doyle," Caleb said pleasantly. "Fine turnout." Martha's face pinched. She turned to the women nearest her, the mercantile man's wife, the 2 Price daughters, a knot of farm wives in their Sunday calico, and she said, loud enough to carry to the rafters, "I believe I have taken all the air I can stand in here. Ladies," and she walked toward the door, her chin high, and one by one the women rose and gathered their things and followed her out into the dark, skirts hissing, not one of them meeting Nora's eyes as they passed. A few of the men drifted after their wives. The Reverend's daughters went. The fiddler set down his bow. In the space of a minute the hall had emptied of half its number, and those who remained stood back against the walls as though Nora carried fever, leaving a wide, bare stretch of plank floor between her and everyone else. The lanterns hissed. Somewhere a child asked its mother a question and was hushed. Nora looked at that empty floor and understood it for what it was, the town drawing a line in front of her, the way it always had, only this time with Caleb standing on her side of it. She waited for him to feel the weight of it. She waited for him to step back. Caleb took off his hat instead. He handed it to old Tom, who had come up beside them silent as a shadow, and then he turned to Nora and put out his hand. "They've cleared us a floor," Caleb said. "Seems a shame to waste it." She stared at his open hand. "There is no music." "Tom," Caleb said, not looking away from her, "you still know the one your ma used to hum." Old Tom, grizzled and bandy-legged and near 60, went red to the ears. But he cleared his throat, and in a cracked, low, surprisingly true voice, he began to sing an old slow air, the kind that came over the water with people who had left everything behind, all longing and no words that Nora knew. It filled the silent hall thin and brave. Now Caleb said, "May I?" Nora put her hand in his because she did not know how to refuse it and go on breathing. His hand closed warm and dry over her cold fingers, and he drew her out onto the cleared floor, into the middle of all that hostile watching, and he set his other hand light against her back and began to move her in a slow turn. She had never danced. Not with a white man, not with anyone no one had ever asked. She stumbled, and he steadied her without seeming to, letting her feel the count through his hand, patient as he was with a green horse. The town watched. Boone was there, she saw over Caleb's shoulder, standing by the cider with a cup in his hand and a look on his face like a man watching money burn. Let him watch. Caleb turned her, and the turquoise swung cool against her throat, and old Tom's cracked old song went on and on. "Head up," Caleb murmured. "You dance better than half these folks ever will, you just don't know it yet." "They hate you now," she said under her breath, "for this. You feel it. I feel it. Then why?" And here Caleb Hartley leaned his head down close, so his mouth was near her ear, and his voice was for her alone, under the singing, where no one else in that watching room could reach it. "Because you're mine, Nora Redcloud," he said. "You have been since the day I watched you kneel in the dirt of that street, and not one of these people was worth the dust you were gathering. You're mine, and my word on it is good, and any man or woman who wants you gone from this valley is going to have to come through me to do it. Every last one of them, and they know what my word's worth." His hand pressed warm at her back, turning her gentle through the song. "So you hold your head up. You're not standing alone in that street anymore. You hear me? Not ever again." Nora had spent her whole life learning not to weep where anyone could see. She did not weep now. But something behind her ribs that had been clenched tight as a fist for 26 years came loose all at once, and she had to close her eyes against the light for a moment and simply move where his hand told her, blind and unmoored, and for the first time she could remember held. "I have never," she said, and had to stop and start again. "I have never belonged to anyone. My father died. My mother's people could not keep me. I have belonged nowhere to no one my whole life. Do you understand what you are saying to me? Do you understand you cannot say it and then take it back?" "I don't take my word back." He said it simple, like a man stating the color of the sky. "Not ever. That's the whole of it, Nora. That's the only thing I've got worth having, and I'm laying it down for you." She opened her eyes and looked up at his plain, steady face, and she believed him. That was the thing that frightened her more than the whole silent, hostile town at her back, that she believed him. Old Tom's song wound down to its last low note and held there and stopped, and for a moment there was no sound at all in the Grange hall but the hiss of the lanterns and the two of them breathing, standing close in the middle of the cleared floor. Then someone by the wall, a farmer's boy, too young to know better or maybe too honest, began to clap, and was hushed hard by his mother and went silent. No one else joined him, but he had clapped. Nora would remember that. One person in that whole town had clapped. Caleb straightened and stepped back, keeping her hand in his, and looked around the room slow and level, meeting every eye that would meet his, letting the silence say the thing he did not need to say twice. Then he took his hat back from old Tom and set it on his head. "We'll be going," he said to the room. "Thank you kindly for the floor." He led her out through the doors into the cool dark, and the buckboard, and the long road home under a sky thick with stars, and neither of them spoke, and neither of them let go. Behind them, in the emptied light of the Grange hall, Silas Boone set down his cup of cider very carefully, as a man does when his hands want to do something else. He had seen the whisper. He had seen the woman's face change when it landed, had seen 26 years of redemption, Wells' good order come undone in the space of one slow dance, and he understood, the way he understood cattle and land and the price of a man's mortgage, exactly what it meant. Hartley would not be talked out of her. Hartley would not be shamed out of her. That left only the harder ways. "Reckon the party's over," Boone said to the man beside him, and smiled, which was worse than if he had cursed. He drew on his gloves finger by finger. "See the boys get out to the north line tonight. Hartley's got a lot of fence for one man to watch. Be a shame if some of it didn't hold." The man went. Boone stood a while longer in the lantern light, looking at the bare stretch of floor where the half-breed woman had danced with the only man in the territory fool enough to claim her. And he thought about land, and about the law, and about all the quiet legal ways a man of means could break a thing that force alone could not. Then he put on his own hat and walked out into the dark to see it started. Far down the north road, Nora rode with her cold hand warm at last inside Caleb's, and let herself just once believe it. Chapter 6, Sabotage and Suspicion. The trouble came in the gray hour before dawn, the way trouble always seemed to on a ranch, when a man was too deep in sleep to hear the first of it and too far behind to catch the last. Old Tom found the cut fence. He came pounding on the main house door with his hat already in his fist, and Caleb Hartley was pulling his boots on before the second knock landed. "North line," Tom said. "Someone took a nipper to it. Clean work. Wires snipped in a dozen places, not tore. Cattle went through it like water out a broke dam." Nora Red Cloud was already at the corral when they came out, a blanket thrown over her shoulders and her turquoise necklace dark against her throat in the half-light. She had heard the horses stamping and known before anyone told her that the night had turned wrong. She always knew. It was a thing the tribe had given her, and a thing the town had never forgiven her for having. "How many head?" Caleb asked. "Can't count what's run off," Tom said, "but the tank's fouled too. Somebody dumped a dead coyote in the upper spring. Water's turning. We got 2 days, maybe 3, before its poison cleared down the draw." For a moment no one spoke. The cold pressed in around them, and the mountain stood black and patient against a sky just beginning to bruise with light. Nora watched Caleb's jaw and waited for the thing she had waited for her whole life, the moment a man's kindness ran out and left the meanness underneath showing. It did not come. Caleb only said, "Boone." "You don't know that," Tom said. "I know it." He turned to the shed where 2 of the hired men had come to stand, shirts half-buttoned, faces uncertain in the gloom. "Saddle up. We ride the fence, and we ride the water, and we bring back every head we can before we lose the light." They rode out hard, and Nora rode with them, and no man said a word against it, though she felt the younger hand, a lank boy named Willis, cut his eyes at her more than once as if her being there were part of the wrongness of the morning. By noon the story had already changed shape and grown teeth. It came up the road with a peddler, and it came down from the high pasture with a line rider, and by the time it reached the yard it had stopped being about a cut fence at all. "They're saying the Apache done it," Willis blurted when they had stopped to breathe the horses at the fouled spring. "Down in town, saying he would not look at Nora, signaled 'em. Lit a fire on the ridge or some such, called 'em down on us." The words hung there in the cold. Nora felt the old familiar closing of her throat, the pull to go still and small the way a rabbit goes still, and she hated herself for it. She lifted her chin instead. "If my mother's people wanted your cattle," she said evenly, "you would not have found the fence cut with a nipper. You would have found nothing at all. That is not how they take." Willis flushed. He was young and frightened, and the fear needed somewhere to go. "Then how come you knew about the water 'fore anybody said?" "Because I have eyes," she said, "and I use them." Caleb rode his horse in between them slow, the way a man walks between 2 dogs. He did not raise his voice. He never did. It was one of the things about him she had learned to lean on without meaning to. "Willis," he said, "you work for me, you know who cut that fence." "No, sir." "You see her cut it." "No, sir." "Then you'll not carry Boone's talk on my ground." He let that settle. "Anybody here who can't stomach working alongside Miss Red Cloud can draw his pay at the house and be gone by supper. I'll think no worse of him for it. But he'll go quiet, and he'll go now." No one drew his pay. But Nora saw the way the men glanced at one another, the small arithmetic of fear working behind their eyes, and she knew that Caleb had bought her a day, maybe 2, and that fear was a note that always came due in the end. She found the truth in the dirt, because that was where truth lived if a person knew how to read it. She went back to the north line alone in the flat afternoon light, when the shadows were shortest and least apt to lie, and she got down off her horse and got down onto her knees in the churned earth by the cut wire, and she read it the way Bright River had taught her when she was small enough to ride in front of him on his pony. 2 horses shod? That first, Apache raiders did not ride shod horses down out of the hills, and any man who said they did had never once cut sign in his life. The prints were deep at the toe where the riders had stood in their stirrups to work the wire, and one horse threw its off hind out at a slant, a bad-shod, sway-footed animal she had seen before. She had seen it 3 days past, tied at the rail outside the mercantile, under a saddle with silver conchos on the skirt. Boone's man, the one they called Dutch. There was more, a twist of tobacco paper ground into the mud, the cheap kind sold at the saloon and nowhere else. A boot heel with a worn nail head that printed a little crescent moon in the soft ground, plain as a signature to anyone who bothered to look. No moccasin, no unshod pony, no sign at all of the people the town had already tried and hung in their minds. Nora crouched there a long time, her fingers just above the print, not touching it. She thought about how easy it was to lay a crime at the feet of people no one would defend. She thought about how a lie could ride faster than any truth because it went downhill the whole way. And then she gathered what she could, the twist of paper, a sketch scratched onto a scrap of hide of the crescent heel and the slant-thrown shoe, and she rode back to tell Caleb what the ground had told her. He listened to all of it without once looking away from her face. When she finished, he was quiet a moment, and then he said, "You could stand up in a court and say that." "A court," she said, "would not believe the ground if a half-breed read it to them." "I'd believe it," he said. And that was the thing that undid her a little every time. Not grand words, just a man saying he would take her word as if her word were a currency that spent anywhere. The cattle did not save themselves, and the cold came down that night with a hard hand. They worked the draw by lantern, and by moon, Caleb and Tom and the wavering hands and Nora, gathering the scattered herd out of the brush and the coolies, pushing them back toward good water and good wire in a wind that came off the peaks like a blade. Nora rode point and read the land in the dark by the shapes of things and the smell of the sage, and she found a bunch of 30 head bogged in a wash that the men had ridden right past, and she gentled them out one at a time with her voice low in the Apache words that cattle, at least, had never learned to hate. Somewhere past midnight, she and Caleb found themselves alone at the head of the draw, the herd bedded and breathing steam behind them. The fire the men had built a small orange coal far down the valley. "You should be froze through," he said. He had shrugged out of his own coat before she could stop him and settled it over her shoulders, and his hands stayed there a moment, one on each side of her neck, warm through the cold. "I have been colder," she said, "in warmer weather." He understood what she meant. She watched him understand it. And she thought that in all her life no one had ever looked at her and simply understood, without her having to bleed the meaning out of herself drop by drop. "Nora," he said. It was near the first time he had used the name without the miss in front of it. "When this is done, the fence, Boone, all of it, I mean for you to stay, not as higher, you know what I mean." "I know what you mean," she said. Her heart was doing a thing it had no business doing out here in the killing cold. "It will cost you everything they can find to charge." "Then it'll cost me everything," he said, "and I'll still have paid too little." He leaned in, and she did not pull back, and the kiss was slow and cold-lipped and warm underneath, tasting of wood smoke and the long night. And for one whole breath Nora Red Cloud belonged somewhere fully, without half or maybe or the word breed hanging over it like a rope. Then from down the valley, a rider came up the draw at a gallop, and the moment broke like ice underfoot. It was the boy Willis, wide-eyed, his horse blowing. "Rider come out from town," he panted. "Left a paper at the house. Tom said bring it to you quick." He held it out, and it shook, and Nora could not tell whether it was the cold or the fear. Caleb took it and read it by the moon, and Nora watched the news land in him the way she had watched him take every blow that day, without flinching outward, and with something going hard and still behind his eyes. "What is it?" she said, not a question she already half knew. He folded the paper once, careful, as if it were something that might cut him. "Boone's gone to the territorial court," he said. His voice was level, and that levelness was worse than shouting. "Petition to have you removed from the territory, says you're a vagrant, a woman of no fixed people." He said the words like they tasted foul. "There's a hearing set." Nora stood very still in the borrowed coat that still held his warmth. Below them the herd shifted and lowed, saved for now, and above them the cold stars wheeled indifferent over a land that had never once agreed to hold her. She had been called breed and worse. She had been spat at and refused and had her herbs spilled in the dust. All of it had been the town's contempt, and contempt she knew how to carry. This was different. This was the law itself bending down to say what the town had only ever muttered, that she belonged nowhere, and now there would be a paper to prove it. "So," she said softly, "the whisper against me has learned to write." Caleb reached out and took her hand, there in the black cold, and held it hard enough to hurt and did not let go. "Then we'll answer it," he said, "with the truth in the ground and my name on the deed. Let them come." And Nora, who had spent her whole life expecting every door to close, looked at the man holding her hand against the whole weight of the law and the town both, and let herself, dangerously, believe the door might yet stay open. Chapter 7, The Price of His Word. The notice came nailed to the door of the mercantile, and by noon half of Redemption Wells had read it. A hearing was set for the following Thursday, before the territorial magistrate riding up from the county seat, on the matter of one Nora Redcloud, styled in the black ink of the law as a vagrant of no fixed people. Nora read it once, standing in the cold morning shadow of the boardwalk, and did not let her face change. She had learned young that a face was a door, and that a shut door kept the weather out. But her hands, when she folded the reins back into her palm, were not steady, and she hated that they knew what her face would not say. Old Tom found her at the corral fence when she rode back to the ranch. He spat into the dust and looked at the far hills a long moment before he spoke. "Caleb's gone into town to see about the note," he said. "Bank called it, whole thing all at once like they'd been waiting on a reason." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Boone bought the paper, that's the truth of it. He owns the debt now, same as he'd like to own the water and the grass and every last thing that grazes on it." "And me," Nora said. Tom's jaw worked. He'd like to think so. He looked at her then, straight, the way few men in that country had ever looked at her. "You saved that mare when the whole county'd have shot her. You read the flood before the sky did. Whatever a magistrate writes on a paper, girl, you belong to this ground seal as Boone ever will." She did not trust herself to answer that, so she went to see to the horses, which never asked her what she was. The hearing was still 4 days off, but the town had already begun its own trial, the way towns do. Reverend Price came to the ranch on Tuesday, hat in his 2 hands, and would not meet Caleb's eye for the first while. Nora, mending harness in the shade of the barn, heard every word through the open door, for the Reverend had not thought to lower his voice, or had not troubled to. "I have prayed on it, Caleb, I have, but my congregation, there is talk of a new man for the pulpit if I stand mute. Martha Doyle means to testify. She'll swear to the girls, her habits, her heathen doctoring, her unfitness. And if I say nothing, they'll count my silence for consent to the whole ungodly business." "Then say nothing," Caleb answered, and his voice was the flat, level thing it became when he had decided. "Silence never yet damned an honest man. It is not so simple, and you know it. I baptized half this town. I buried the other half. I cannot afford to." "You cannot afford to be a coward, Reverend. That's the plain size of it." A chair scraped. "You came out here for me to make it easy on you, to let you off gentle. I won't. You'll do what's right or you'll do what's safe, and you'll have to be the one to know the difference on the morning it counts." The Reverend left with his hat still in his hands. Nora watched the dust of his going and told herself it was nothing to her, and knew it for a lie. Boone came the next day, in a fine buggy with a fine coat, and a mouth full of the kind of reason that costs a man his soul in small change. Nora did not mean to listen. She had come up to the house with a basket of the yarrow and sage she dried for the winter cough, and the front room windows were open to the last warm of the year. Caleb had not seen her. Boone had his back to the glass. "I'm not a hard man, Hartley," Boone was saying. "I don't like to see a neighbor go under. That note comes due Friday, and a man can't conjure $1,100 out of the air. But I'll buy the west section off you, cash on the barrel. Enough to clear the bank and keep your roof." "The west section's my water," Caleb said. "It's a section of dirt, you've others." A pause, silk over a knife. "And I'll do more, this ugly court business, the vagrancy suit I've influence with the magistrate. It goes away, vanishes like it was never wrote. You keep your ranch and your good name both." A creak of leather as Boone leaned in. "You only send the woman off, back to her people or wherever a thing like that goes. No shame in it. A man corrects a mistake, that's all it is. And in a year, nobody in this county recollects you ever made one." The silence that followed was the longest Nora had ever stood inside. She found she had stopped breathing, waiting on it, the way you wait on a rock fall to finish falling. "Get out of my house," Caleb said. "Now, Hartley, you heard me. You come into my home and you offer me my own land back for the price of a person, and you call it a kindness." His voice never rose, and that was the terror of it. "I've been poor, Boone. I was poor before you ever had a nickel to lord over anybody. I slept in barns and I ate what I could catch, and I learned one thing worth the keeping. A man's word is the only thing in this world that's wholly his, that no bank can call and no drought can burn. Mine's given. It's given to her. You can have the ranch. You can have the water and the grass and the roof off my head. You cannot have my word because it is not for sale, and if that's ruin, then I'll be ruined and still sleep sound." "You'll lose everything," Boone said, and now the silk was gone. "Then I'll lose it standing up." Nora set the basket down on the porch boards without a sound, and walked away toward the bunk shed with her heart going like a struck drum. because she had just heard a man throw his whole life into the fire rather than throw her out the door, and she did not know how to be a woman who was worth a thing like that. She packed that night. It did not take long. A life lived on the margins fits in a saddlebag with room to spare. Her mother's healing bundle, the good knife, the 2 dresses, the turquoise necklace she never took off and would not now. She worked by the low light of a single candle, and everything she folded she argued into place. He will lose the ranch he broke his back to build. He will lose his standing in the only country he has. And for what for me, who belongs nowhere, who the tribe holds at arm's length and the town holds in contempt? Bright River's words came back to her, spoken across a fire not 2 weeks gone. A white man's promise is written in sand, daughter. The tide comes for all of it. If she simply went in the dark and let the trail take her, then the note could be paid, the suit would die for want of a body to try, and Caleb Hartley would keep his life. It was the one gift she had left to give. It was the only way she knew to love him that did not cost him everything. But under Bright River's words there was another voice, and it would not be quiet. You are mine. He had leaned to her ear at the harvest social in the cleared and terrible silence of that floor, and he had said it low only for her asterisk, you are mine, and anyone who wants you gone answers to me. No one in the whole of her life had ever claimed her. Not the people who spat her name, not the people whose tongue she spoke imperfectly. He had. Quietly and meaning it, and here she was folding her second dress to make his gift come to nothing. She blew out the candle before she could weep, and led the gray mare out into the starlight. He was on the trail before her. She should have known he would be. He sat the sorrel across the mouth of the wash where the ranch road met the county track, a dark shape against the paler dark, and when she drew up he did not reach for her reins or bar her way. He only sat there and let her stop of her own will, which was somehow worse than any hand. Old Tom saw your candle go out early, Caleb said. Man knows what an early dark window means. He come and got me. Move your horse, Caleb. No. I heard him, Boone. I heard the whole of it through the window. Her voice cracked and she despised it. You'll lose everything, the water, the note, the all of it, over me. I won't be the thing that ruins you. I have been the thing that ruined enough already. Let me go and you keep your life. That's not your ruin to spend, he said. It's mine. And I already spent it. I spent it when I gave my word, and a man doesn't get to ungive a thing just because the bill came due. Your word, she was crying now and did not fight it in the dark. You'd throw a ranch away for a word about a half-breed woman who... Don't, it was the first hard thing he'd said. Don't you say that name for yourself, not to me. He swung down then and came to her stirrup and looked up at her with his hat off. You want to know my fear, Nora? Here it is. I'm not afraid of Boone. I'm not afraid of losing the grass. I'm afraid I'll wake up an old man on land I saved by sending off the only person who ever made it a home. That's the ruin I can't live standing up in. The other kind I can carry. She looked down at him a long while, at the plain, steady, upturned face of the one man who had never once looked at her with anything she had to armor against. I have never belonged to anyone, she said very low. I don't know how it's done. You don't do anything, he said. You just stay. We fight the thing Thursday, and we lose or we win, but we do it here together, and you quit trying to save me by leaving because it isn't saving. Deal. A long breath went out of her, and with it something she had been carrying so long she had stopped feeling its weight. Deal, she whispered. He reached up and took the gray's lead from her hand, and they turned back for the ranch, 2 horses and 2 people walking slow under all that cold and enormous sky. They had not gone half a mile when Nora smelled it. She reined up, lifted her face to the night wind out of the south, out of the town. Under the clean dark cold of it there was something else faint and wrong, wood smoke where no hearth should be smoking at this hour, and beneath that, fainter still, the sick sweet reek she knew from a childhood of camps gone bad. Caleb, she was already turning the mare. Down the valley, low against the horizon where Redemption Wells lay, an orange smear had begun to pulse and grow. The town's afire, and that smell... Her healer's mind went cold and clear and terrible all at once. That's fever, smoke, sickness. They're burning the bedding of the dead. Chapter 8, Heathen Poison. The sickness came into Redemption Wells the way all bad things came quietly, and then all at once. Nora smelled it before the town would say its name. She had ridden in for lamp oil, Caleb 3 days gone to the county seat to stand before the bank and beg his own note back from Silas Boone's hands, and the main street had a wrongness to it that raised the hair on her arms. No children in the dust. no washing on the lines behind the boarding house. A house near the church with a strip of black cloth already nailed above the door, and behind another window a cough she knew, deep and barking and wet. The cough that came up out of a small chest like something clawing to get out. Diphtheria. Her mother had called it the strangling angel. It came for the little ones first, and it did not come alone. She had spent enough of her life being unwelcome to know the shape of a town that wanted her gone, but she had never seen one that could not spare the strength to say so. Faces turned from her out of habit, not heat. A woman clutched a bundled child against her shoulder and hurried past without the usual glare, too frightened to hate her properly. At the mercantile, the clerk who had spilled her herbs in the dust a season ago stood gray-faced behind his counter and said only, "Doc's took to his bed. Fell sick treating the prute boy. Ain't nobody left standing to doctor us." Nora set her coin down for the oil and did not touch it back when he failed to make change. "Ellery is ill. 2 days, fever's got half the young uns on this street." His eyes came up to hers, and for one bare moment there was no scorn in them at all, only a drowning man's flat despair. Then he remembered what she was and looked away. "Reckon it don't concern you." It concerned her the way the strangling angel concerned any woman who had watched her mother pull children back from its grip with steam and knife, and a decoction of the pale root that grew along the washes east of the rim. She had the root. She had dried a season's worth of it in the rafters of the room Caleb had built her, not knowing why, only that her mother's voice had told her a body always kept it by. She thought of Caleb, 4 days' ride away with the whole weight of the ranch on his back, and of his word laid over her like a coat. And she thought, "He is not here, and the choice is mine to make alone, and I have made it already." She went to the doctor's house first, because a healer went where the healer had fallen. Martha Doyle was on the porch. The boarding house matron had planted herself square in the doorway of Dr. Ellery's home with 2 other women flanking her, and a wall of skirts between Nora and the door. And her face, which had led every shunning Nora had ever suffered, was flushed with a righteousness that fear had sharpened to a blade. "You turn right around," Martha said. "We know what you are and we know what you carry. There'll be no heathen conjuring over Christian children, not while I draw breath." "Your doctor is dying in that room," Nora said. "So are your children. I have medicine that will open their throats before the swelling closes them for good. I have seen it work. I am not asking to be loved, Mrs. Doyle. I am asking to be let past." "Heathen poison," Martha spat the words like seeds. "I've seen your kind's medicine, roots and mutterings and the devil's own smoke. Will trust in the Lord and in Doc when he's well, and will not have you laying hands on so much as a hair of them." Her voice cracked high. "You'd like that, wouldn't you? Get one of ours in your grip and finish what the fever started, then run off to your people in the hills." Behind her, through the open door, Nora heard it, a child fighting for air, that terrible high crowing on the intake, each breath a smaller victory than the last. The prute boy. She knew the sound the way she knew her own heartbeat, and she knew, standing on those steps with the whole town's contempt made flesh in front of her, that the boy had perhaps an hour, and that every minute of it was being spent. "Please," Nora said, and she who had never begged for herself begged now for a child she had never met. "Whatever you believe of me, let me try. If I am wrong, you have lost nothing, and if I am right." "Get her off my street," Martha said. They did not lay hands on her. They did not have to. Nora stood in the road with her satchel of pale root and her mother's knowledge and her mother's steadiness, and she listened to the crowing breaths grow further apart, and further, and then not come at all, and a woman's scream tore open the afternoon, and the strip of black cloth that would be nailed above the prute door was already, in that scream, being cut. A child had died for the length of an argument. Nora would carry the sound of it the rest of her life. She was still standing there, unable to make her legs move when the rider came. He wore a territorial marshal's star, and he did not dismount. He read her name off the paper in a bored, official drawl, Nahii Red Cloud, known as Nora, a vagrant of no fixed people, and he told her that by order of the district court she was to quit Redemption Wells and the whole of the territory within 3 days, and that the order was signed and sealed, and there was no appeal to be had, and that Mr. Silas Boone had been kind enough to advance the court its costs. Boone himself sat his horse a little way off, hat tipped back, watching her the way a man watches a fire he has set catch properly. He walked his animal over when the marshal had finished, slow, savoring it. "Told Hartley how it'd go," he said low for her alone. "Told him a man can't hitch himself to a stray and keep his standing, nor his land, nor his water. he wouldn't hear it. So I made the town hear it for him. He looked past her to the Prout house and the woman keening on its steps and something in his mouth curved. Timely, ain't it? Fever comes and they see plain what you are. No home, no people, no place. You never belonged nowhere, girl, and now there's a paper says so. He gathered his reins. Hartley's 100 mile off arguing with a bank that already answers to me. By the time he rides in, you'll be a dust cloud heading for the reservation, if they'll even take you, which I hear they won't. He rode away and left her with it. Rock Bottom, Bright River might have called it, the place where the ground stops. Nora stood in the failing light of a town that had watched a child strangle rather than let her hands come near it, cast out by law and by the pulpit both, her one man too far to reach and her one hope of a home reduced to a marshal's paper and 3 days' grace. Every door she had ever pressed her hand against had opened onto this. She had let herself believe Caleb's whispered word could hold the wind off her. She had let herself hope. And hope, she saw now, was only the longest way to fall. She had turned her horse toward the edge of town, toward the linta that had never been a home and now would not even be that, when the running footsteps came behind her. "Wait, please, Miss Red Cloud, wait." A young woman, apron still tied, hair come loose, her face swollen with weeping and terror both. Nora knew her a little Ruth Ann Carey, who had never spit at her but had never stopped Martha's mouth either, who had turned her shoulder like all the rest because turning was safer than not. She caught Nora's stirrup and hung on it as though it were the last solid thing in the world. "My Sam," she gasped. "My boy, he's got the crowing in his throat now, the same as the Prout child had, and Doc can't rise and Mrs. Doyle says pray, but I've prayed till my knees are raw and he's getting worse. He's turning the color and I can't watch him." She could not finish it. She looked up at Nora, this woman who had shunned her, and every wall the town had built came down in her ruined face. "They said you had medicine. Is it true? I don't care what it is. I don't care what you are. I'll take heathen and glad of it if it'll let my baby breathe. Please, I'm begging you, please." And there it was, the first crack in the wall, small as a hairline in a dry pot. A mother stripped down past prejudice to the one thing under it. Nora looked down at her and felt the old wound and the new one both, and felt beneath them the thing her mother had put in her that no town could spit out. She could ride away clean. The paper gave her leave to. Every soul in redemption Wells had earned her turned back, and she owed them nothing but the dust of her going. But she was not their kind of thing. She never had been. She was Nahii, daughter of a woman who ran toward the strangling angel and not away from it, and a healer did not choose her patients by whether they had loved her. "Take me to him," Nora said, and swung down. They went the back way, through the alleys behind the shuttered stores, because a woman under a removal order did not walk the main street to break the law in front of the marshal who had served it. Nora moved fast and quiet, her satchel against her hip, her mother's steadiness settling over her the way it always did the instant there was work for her hands. In the Carey kitchen she found the boy blue at the lips, his small ribs sucking hollow with every crowing pull, and she set the water to boiling and shook the pail root out onto the table and told Ruth and what to hold and how, and began. She worked, she lost the light and did not notice. Word slipped from house to fevered house the way word does. The half-breed is in the Carey place. The half-breed will come. And one by one in the dark, other mothers began to gather at the back door with sick children in their arms, defying Martha, defying the marshal's paper, defying everything but the crowing in their little ones' throats. It was near midnight, her hands raw and her root running low, and 3 children already breathing easier, that Nora smelled the new smell come in under the door. Smoke, not the good clean steam of her kettle. Wood smoke and lamp oil and the fat, greasy reek of a building well alight. She crossed to the window. Down the street, orange had bloomed against the black, throwing the false shapes of dancing men across the storefronts, and it had taken the near end of Martha Doyle's boarding house, where Ruth Ann had told her not an hour past, the 6 sickest children in Redemption Wells had been carried and laid in rows, too weak to be moved, with no one but old Martha to watch them burn. Nora looked at the fire and thought of the boy who had died for the length of an argument. Then she picked up her satchel and went out into the smoke. Chapter 9, The Claim and the Rescue. The boarding house was burning from the eaves down, and Nora Red Cloud went in through the smoke because the children were up there and no one else would. She had heard them before she saw the flames, the thin, drowning cough of croup-locked throats, the sound that had been eating through Redemption Wells for 4 nights. Now that sound came from the 2nd floor of Martha Doyle's boarding house, and the whole front of the building was a curtain of fire, and the men in the street stood in a ragged half-circle with their buckets hanging useless at their sides. "The stairs are gone," someone shouted. "Ain't nobody getting up there." Nora tied her wet shawl across her nose and mouth and looked at the porch roof. "The trellis," she said. Her voice did not carry the way a man's would, but it carried enough. "The rose trellis holds. I've climbed worse." "You'll burn," old Tom said. He had ridden in behind her from the ranch, his old face gray in the firelight. He caught her sleeve. "Girl, you'll burn." "Then I'll burn getting them out." She pulled free, gentle about it. "Tom, wet every blanket you can find and stand under that window. When I drop them, you catch." She did not wait to be argued with. She never had. The trellis took her weight, groaning, thorns opening her palms, and she climbed into the heat as if climbing into the mouth of something living. The window at the top gave under her elbow. Then she was inside, on her belly beneath the smoke, and she found them the way she found frightened horses, by the sound of their fear. 3 of them, 2 boys and a small girl with her face pressed into the corner, and Nora knew the girl. She was Martha Doyle's granddaughter, Ruth, 6 years old, the same child whose mother had spit the word half-breed at Nora on the church steps not 2 weeks gone. "Ruth," Nora said, close to her ear, calm as still water. "Nahi, I has you, come now. We are going out the window into the dark, and it will feel like flying." The child came into her arms. Children always did in the end. They had not yet learned who they were supposed to hate. She carried them to the window one at a time and lowered them by their wrists into the blankets stretched below. And each time the crowd made a sound she had never heard them make on her account, a great gasping cheer, wet with fear. Ruth went last because Ruth clung, and Nora had to peel the small hands from her collar and say, in Apache and then in English, that she did not lie, that a red cloud did not lie. The floor was smoking through the boards when Nora went out the window herself. The trellis was gone by then, eaten. She hung by her hands from the sill and dropped, and old Tom and 2 other men broke her fall, and the 3 of them went down together in a tangle of soot and wet wool. For a moment she lay on her back in the mud and looked at the stars through the smoke, and breathed, and could not remember the last time she had let herself simply lie down in front of these people. Then she got up, because the fire was only half the sickness. They laid the rescued children in the church, which was the only building wide enough and far enough from the flames. And there Nora came up hard against the wall that had stood against her all her life, because it was standing in the doorway wearing Martha Doyle's face. "You will not bring your heathen poison in among these babies," Martha said, but her voice had no iron in it tonight. It shook. Her granddaughter lay coughing on a pew 10 feet behind her, laboring for each breath, her small chest sucking in at the throat with every pull, the true croup, the closing kind, the kind that killed by morning. "Martha," Nora stood very straight. Her hands were burned and bleeding and full of the pouch she had carried through fire. "Your Ruth cannot breathe. In an hour the swelling closes her throat and no doctor in this territory can open it again. I have a steam and a root that brings the swelling down. I have watched it save children with my own eyes. I am asking you to stand aside." "Dr. Ellery is on his back with the same fever, and you know it." Nora's voice gentled, and that was worse for Martha than shouting would have been. "I am not asking you to like me. I have never once in my life asked that. I am asking you to let me save your girl." For a long, terrible moment Martha Doyle did not move. Then Ruth made a sound, a high, thin whistle of a breath. The sound a body makes when it is running out of room, and something in the old woman broke that had been building for 4 nights, and she stepped aside, and she said the only apology she was capable of. "Save her," Martha whispered. "Please save her." Nora was already moving. She worked the rest of that night the way her mother had taught her, in the tongue the town called savage. She built the steam over the stove and crushed the pale root into it, and she held each choking child over the bowl beneath a tented blanket, and she sang to them, low in Apache, the song for calming a frightened thing, and one by one the whistling breaths eased and deepened and the small throats opened. Reverend Price came at the 3rd hour and stood in the doorway of his own church and watched a woman he had failed to defend pull child after child back from the edge, and he did not say a word about doctrine. He rolled up his sleeves and fetched water. By gray dawn the fever had turned. Not one of the rescued children died. Ruth Doyle slept, truly slept, her breath a soft and even thing, and Martha sat beside her holding the small hand and would not look at Nora, because she could not, because to look at her now was to see everything she had done. The town had watched. That was the thing Nora had not counted on. They had watched the half-breed woman climb a burning trellis for their sons, and crowded the church windows to watch her breathe life back into their daughters through a whole black night. And a lie can survive a great many things, but it cannot survive being watched dying. She stepped out onto the church steps into the cold, new light, gray to the elbows, hands weeping through the rag she'd bound them in, and the people did not turn their shoulders to her. That was when Silas Boone rode into the middle of it with a paper in his fist and 3 men at his back. "Order of the Territorial Court," Boone called out, and his horse wheeled in the churned mud. He held the paper high. "This woman is a vagrant of no fixed people, and she is to be removed from Redemption Wells today. I aim to see it done." The crowd did not part for him. That, too, was new. "She saved my boy," a man said, just that. And another voice, "Pulled my Sarah out of the fire with her own hands." And Martha Doyle came out onto the steps behind Nora, gray and terrible, and said in a voice that carried to the far end of the street, "That woman saved my granddaughter's life not 1 hour past, Silas Boone, and you will not touch a hair on her head while I draw breath." Boone's face went ugly. "You'd all take the word of her." "We take the word of the man who cut Hartley's fence," said old Tom, stepping forward, and beside him came one of Boone's own hands, a young one, hat in his hands, who had watched the fire same as everyone. "Tell him, Wiley. Tell him what we done at the fence line and who paid us and what note he had forged to break Hartley at the bank. Tell him, or I will, and I'll swear it before the judge." The young man told them. The forged note, the cut wire, the fouled water, the lie about a raid Nora had never signaled, all of it laid plain while Boone's face ran through every color of a cornered thing. And into that stunned street rode Caleb Hartley on a lathered horse, come straight from the county seat and 40 miles of hard dark, and he took in the whole of it in one long look. The burned boarding house, the soot-gray woman on the church steps, Boone with his worthless paper, the town standing where it had never once stood. He swung down. He did not go to Boone. He went to her. "You're hurt," Caleb said. It was the first thing. His thumb touched the rag on her hands, and his jaw went tight. "Your hands." "I'm whole," Nora said. "The note's dead," he told her low just for her. "Beat it at the county bank. He can't call my land. He can't do anything to us now." Then, louder, turning, letting the whole street have it. "That paper's void, Boone. The court that signed it will hear by nightfall what you are, and I've got the man to swear it." He set himself square in front of the town, and he took Nora's ruined hand in his, careful, like it was the only thing he owned. "Hear me, all of you, once, so there's no mistaking it after. This woman is going to be my wife. Her home is my home. Her name is under my roof and my word, and any man, any court, any lie that comes for her comes through me first and finds me all the way at the bottom of it. That's my word. You all know what my word is worth." No one spoke against it. Reverend Price came down the steps and stood beside them and said, quiet and steady, "I'll marry them myself, and God forgive me the weeks I waited to say so." They took Boone that morning, his own men swearing to the fence and the note, and the paper that would have driven her out was so much ash by the time the sun cleared the hills. But that was not the moment Nora would keep. The moment she would keep came after, when the crowd had thinned, and the light had turned gold, and Caleb drew her aside into the lee of the church wall. Out of the eyes of the town he had just faced down for her. He was not a man for speeches, and he had already spent all the loud words he had. So he did what he had done that first night on the dance floor, when she had learned that being chosen was a thing that could happen to her. He leaned close, his mouth at her ear, and he whispered so that only she would ever hear it. "You climbed into a fire for people who spit at you," he said, "because that's who you are, and I have never in my life been so proud of anything. You hear me, Nahia? You're mine. Not because I saved you, you saved yourself and half this town besides. You're mine because I choose it every morning, and I'll choose it every morning I'm given." His hand came up and cupped the back of her neck, gentle. "You don't belong nowhere anymore. You belong here. You belong to me, and I belong to you, and you are home." Nora Redcloud, who had knelt in the dust to gather scattered herbs while a town laughed, who had walked the boardwalk with turquoise at her throat and nothing at her back, stood in the gold light with her burned hands in his, and let herself, at last, be held. "Say it in my mother's tongue," she whispered back, "so I'll know you mean it all the way down." And he did. He had been learning it in the high pasture all along. Chapter 10, A Place to Belong. The first snow had not yet come to Redemption Wells, but the mornings carried the promise of it, sharp and clean, and Nora Red Cloud woke each of them in a room that was truly hers. She still could not quite believe the plainness of the miracle. A bed, a window facing east, the smell of pine planking Caleb had cut and joined with his own hands. She would lie still a moment and listen to the ranch waking around her, and only then let herself rise, as though rising too quickly might spill the whole of it. The town had changed slowly, the way frozen ground changes under a thaw, grudging, then all at once. It began with the mercantile. She had walked in that first week after the fever broke, her spine set for the old fight, her turquoise cool at her throat. But the clerk who had once spilled her herbs in the dust took her coin without a flinch and counted her change into her open palm, careful not to let it fall. "Ma'am," he said, and the word came out cracked like it had rusted in his mouth. "Your account's good here. Always was, I reckon. Just took some of us a while to know it." She had not answered him. She had only nodded once, the way her uncle nodded, an acknowledgment that cost nothing and granted everything, and walked out into the light with her parcels under her arm and her head high. Martha Doyle was harder. The boarding house matron came to the ranch on a gray afternoon, alone, driving her own trap, which Nora understood was itself a kind of confession. Martha would not send a boy with this errand. She climbed down stiff-backed and stood in the yard turning her gloves over in her hands until Nora came out onto the porch. "I've no gift for this," Martha said finally. "I never learned how, having never once believed I'd need it." She lifted her chin. "My grandson breathes on account of you. He'd be under the churchyard sod if you'd listened to me and stayed away, and I'd have called it God's will and slept sound. That's the truth, and I'll not dress it prettier than it is." "No," Nora agreed, "don't. I called your medicine poison. I called you things I'll not repeat on a decent man's porch." Martha's jaw worked. "I was wrong, not mistaken, wrong. There's a difference, and I've had my nose held to it." She thrust out one gloved hand, blunt as a challenge. "I don't expect you to take it. I'd not in your shoes." Nora looked at the offered hand a long moment. She thought of every turned shoulder, every mother who had pulled a child from her shadow. Then she thought of the boy, blue-lipped and burning, and her own hands working over him through the black hours while this woman wept in the doorway. She took Martha's hand and shook it, firm, once. "You'll bring the boy by in the spring," Nora said. "He'll want tending yet. His lungs took a fright." Martha's composure cracked at that, not at forgiveness, which she might have borne, but at being given a task, a place, a reason to return. She pressed her lips white and nodded and climbed back into her trap without another word, and if her eyes were wet, neither woman named it. They were married on a bright, cold Sunday, in the yard between the main house and the barn, because no church in the territory would have held both the peoples who came. Old Tom had strung the fences with ribbon and swept the yard till the hard-packed earth shone. He wore a collar that plainly strangled him and grinned through all of it. "Never thought I'd live to dance at this ranch," he told Nora, and then gruffer, ducking his head. "Never thought I'd be glad to. You did that, girl. You and him both." The townsfolk came in their Sunday black, fewer than the whole of Redemption Wells, but more than Nora had ever dared imagine. Reverend Price came in his vestments, and there was a new steadiness in him, the steadiness of a man who had once bent and had resolved not to bend again. "I preached caution when I ought to have preached courage," he said to her quietly before the vows. "A shepherd who fears the wolves more than he loves the flock is no shepherd. I mean to do better by this town. By you." He hesitated. "I'd count it an honor to speak the words over you if you'll have a flawed man do it." "We're none of us unflawed, Reverend," Nora said. "Speak them." And from the hills came the other half of her. Bright River rode down at the head of a dozen of her mother's people, and they did not come as supplicants nor as strangers, but as kin in their finest, the horses painted, the old man sitting his mount like something carved from the mountain itself. The town drew back a little at the sight. Old fear dies slow. But Caleb walked out to meet them bareheaded, and clasped the old man's forearm in both hands, and the town saw that too. Bright River came to stand before Nora, and for a long moment the elder only looked at her, at the white woman's dress and the turquoise at her throat and the man waiting at her side. "I told you once a white man's promise is written in sand," Bright River said in the tongue, so that only she would understand. "You did. I was not wrong to say it. I have buried women who trusted such promises." His weathered face moved. "But I have watched this one. His word does not shift with the wind. It is written in the thing I did not think a white man kept it in." He touched his own chest. "In here. Where our word is written." Then he lifted his voice and spoke her name, her true name, Nahii, the one the town had spat and shortened and refused. And he spoke it the way her mother had spoken it, full and unashamed, a name with a mother behind it and a people behind the mother. "You are not half of anything," Bright River said. "You were never half. You are all of your mother and all of your father and all of yourself, and that is not less than one thing. It is more. Carry both. You need not set either down." He laid his hand on her head as her mother once had. "Go with our blessing, daughter. You do not leave us by belonging to him. You cannot leave us. You are ours as the river is the mountains, though it runs to the sea." Nora did not weep in front of the town. She had promised herself that long ago in the dust, and she kept faith with the woman she had been. But something loosened in her chest that had been clenched since she was a girl, and she let it go. She married Caleb Hartley with both her peoples standing witness, and when Reverend Price asked who gave this woman, Bright River answered from one side and old Tom, unbidden and gruff, answered from the other, and the whole yard heard it. Silas Boone was not there to see it. Boone was in the county jail awaiting the circuit judge, his forged note entered into evidence, his own men having traded their testimony for lighter sentences. The land he had schemed to take was safe. The note he had bought to break them had been beaten. Caleb had written it down at the county seat with the honest strength of a man other men would vouch for, and the water rights restored, and the fences mended before the first hard freeze. The removal order lay dismissed and filed, dead paper. They did not speak of Boone at the wedding. He had shaped so much of their trouble, they would not let him shape their joy. That winter they worked side by side, and Nora learned the thing she had not let herself hope for, that she was not rescued, but partnered. Caleb asked her judgment on the stock and took it. She read the weather and the hills and the water, and he built his season on her reading. When a wall-eyed colt no man could gentle came into the yard, it was Nora who gentled it, and Caleb who stood back and let the hands see who had done it. "You could run this outfit without me," he told her once, watching her work the colt on a long line in the frozen ring. "I could," she agreed, not looking up, "but I'd rather not." He laughed. She had learned to love the sound of it, rare and low, and came to stand at the rail, and the colt, sensing no fear in either of them, came at last to eat from her hand. She taught him, too, through those short, dark days, the names of the herbs that grew in the draws, which leaf broke a fever, and which stopped a wound from souring, the stories her mother had told her by firelight of how the world was made and mended. He listened the way he did everything, plainly and without hurry, and he did not treat her knowledge as a curiosity, but as a thing of worth, to be learned and kept. And when Dr. Ellery, well again and humbled by the fever that had nearly taken him, rode out one afternoon to ask, awkward, formal, whether Mrs. Hartley might consent to teach him what she knew of the mountain remedies, Nora looked at the doctor a long moment and then set the kettle on. "Sit," she said. "It's a long teaching and you've a poor start on it." He sat. By spring, the doctor of redemption, Wells kept a shelf of her medicines beside his own, and was not ashamed to say where he had learned their use. On the night of the first true snow, Nora stood on the porch of the house that was hers, watching the flakes come down through the lamplight, silent and unhurried, laying a clean white blessing over the land. Her land. Their land. Land where no clerk would spill her herbs and no matron would name her a thing instead of a woman. Caleb came out and stood behind her, and drew his coat around them both. "Cold," he said. "I've been colder," she leaned back against him, "in warmer weather." He understood her as he had come to. He bent his head and put his mouth close to her ear, the way he had that first night on the dance floor when the whole town watched and hated, and he had crossed the empty space to claim her before all of them. But this whisper was not for them. There was no them left to convince. This one was only theirs. "You're mine," he said low against her hair, "and your home both for good and all." It was the vow he had first spoken as a shield, when she had belonged nowhere and to no one, when his word had been the only wall standing between her and the cold. She had needed it then like a starving thing needs bread. She did not need it now. She had a name spoken with pride by two peoples, a ring, a room facing east, a place on the earth that was truly hers. She did not need the whisper. She wanted it. That was the whole of the difference, and it was everything. So she turned in the circle of his arms, and she put her own mouth to his ear, and she gave him back what she had never in her life had to give another living soul. "And you're mine," Nora whispered, "Caleb Hartley mine." The snow came down over Redemption Wells. Over the churchyard and the mercantile and the boarding house where a boy slept breathing easy. Over the hills where her mother's people kept their fires. Over the ranch where a woman who had belonged nowhere stood whole and wanted in the arms of a man whose word was law. She wore turquoise at her throat, and she was neither half nor stranger. She was home,